Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody and above all the organizers for having me here today. It really is an honor to be here. My paper today would like to plunge into the world of the 1990s film, The Matrix, that was directed by the brothers, which are now sisters, Votorsky, and possibly try to track down echoes of Blake within this very film. So let's go. When the film The Matrix came out in 1999, it was something that the audience wasn't really used to. We were not far from the turn of the century, and we were living the threat of the so-called millennium bug, the Y2K problem, together with the reflections upon the tech boom, which was conditioning our lives. This film was basically showing us through its special effects what the role and the destiny of humanity who let technology prevail could look like. But it wasn't just this, as The Matrix is not only just science fiction, it is way more than that. And that's the reason why maybe The Matrix became such a success. And the reason why it has on me the effects that reading Blake usually has, that is to say, leaving me with more questions than answers. In order to explore how the works of William Blake engage into an indirect, though deep, dialogue with the film discourse, I will try to draw on sometimes on the differential and discursive comparison analysis. This kind of approach makes use of different levels of analysis, which take into account the intercultural and intermedial dialogues and the interaction that, in their own context, different discursive and cultural systems can engage in. Consequently, it studies the new and relevant meanings a text has developed from these interactions. Intertextuality is a common ground for William Blake and the directors Votorsky, as their works and techniques strongly rely on deep and branched out dialogues with the other intertext discourses, genre, cultures, themes, and motifs. John Mee, in his famous study, Dangerous Enthusiasm, had defined Blake as a bricoleur, able to draw on from and combine together different sources and discourses to create his own personal and unique rhetoric. I think this definition would definitely apply to the work of the sisters Wachowski too, whose final result was a film which, according to the same authors, hides, and I'm quoting them here, most messages than we will never know. End of quote. But before trying to go through some of the interactions between the film and Blake's works, though, I'd like to get back to The Matrix and sketch out briefly the plot of the film, as it might come in handy for the analysis that will follow. So you might know that the film's protagonist is Thomas Anderson, interpreted by the actor Keanu Reeves, who's an employee at a software company in the morning and a hacker whose pseudonym is Neo at night. He's approached by members of the resistance, and eventually he meets their boss, Morpheus. Morpheus tells Neo he is the one and wants to show him the truth. The truth is that they all live in the Matrix. The Matrix is a parallel false reality that has been constructed and programmed by the machines for the humans to live in. In reality, humans are asleep and slaves of the machines, as they are actually being used as batteries for the machine's word. What humans think is the real world is just a simulation of reality. Morpheus offers Neo the possibility to get to know what the real world is and join the resistance by choosing to eat the famous red pill, which is what Neo does. Neo then wakes up, and he wakes up naked and immersed in a viscous fluid in a vat, realizing he's in a place full of pods containing other bodies plugged to a central tree-shaped machine or computer. He unplugs himself and manages to join the resistance, that is to say, the war against the machines that had started in an indefinite time in the past. The war's aim was to free humanity from the machine's enslavement. Neo is trained as a warrior and programmed to fight the machines, who come into the shapes of full-dressed and armed agents. But he will be able to win against them only after he becomes aware that he is the one. That is the moment in which he eventually manages to see the Matrix for what it is. And here comes the famous scene of the green codes and ciphers dripping down a screen. In the last scene, Neo then takes a flight and is ready to go and free the world. So, in the first place, I'd like to reflect on the way the authors represent and work on the theme of slavery, which in both the Votorsky's masterpiece and Blake's text has a double meaning. On the one side, the authors deal with a real concept of slavery, a reified, a historical one, a slavery of the body connected to labor. On the other hand, they refer to slavery of the mind. This doubleness in Blake is clear in works such as The Vision of the Daughters of Albion and some of his best known poems like The Chimney Sweeper, or in the remarkable Sin in America, which reappears under different circumstances in The Last Night of the Four Swords, where the slaves are freed as a consequence of the energies released by ore. This has been already mentioned yesterday, but I will quote from America again. Let the slave grinding at the mill run out into the field. Let him look up into the heavens and laugh in the bright air. Let the enchained soul shut up in darkness and in sighing, whose face has never seen a smile in 30 weary years. Rise and look out, his chains are loose, his dungeon doors are open. Of course, being in a work called America, this passage has several and different historical implications and allusions, which have been abundantly studied and analysed. As far as our study is concerned, though, I will focus only on two particular aspects. The first one being the connection between the theme of slavery and the concept of bondage, which is translated into images and therefore a figurative language depicting chains, prisons, manacles, fetters. The second being the concept of slavery as a consequence of a certain idea of labor. Sri McDeasy maintains that in America, slavery has not only to do with the general concept of tyranny and oppression, or with a reference to a historical and cultural phenomenon. The American professor states that, and I'm quoting him here, enslavement has to do with confinement and restriction to a particular identity and a particular role within a productive process. Outside of such work time, labor not only has no value, it has no existence. As in literal slavery, labor is compressed into the body that provides it, a body whose social existence is registered only by virtue of its capacity to do work. End of quote. Obviously, this was clear in a society that at the end of the 18th century was experiencing the industrial boom, whose idea of production was radically changing and whose commercial and political system were succumbing under the power of the beast and the whore. In the Matrix, what changes, what is different and differential compared to Blake's discourses, is the so-called scenography, together with the topography and chronography, of course. We are definitely plunged into a dystopian scene, which is admittedly in the future. In this future time, we can actually see that intelligent and almost independent computers seem to predominate and take over as the tyrannical power to rule. They Urizenically decide and have the life of the human beings at their own disposal. That is basically what makes of The Matrix a science fiction film, by ascribing it into a specific genre, which is not, of course, that pursued by Blake. The concept of slavery, though, is definitely part of the discourse of the film, and it is clearly stated by Morpheus that talking to Neo says, "You're a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage." This kind of bondage is visually appalling in the film, as it is represented by the wires and the tubes that connect the humans to the central computer, and most evidently by the socket which lies at the back of everyone's head. This last image, though totally different from that of the prison or that of the man at the grinding mill in Blake's poems, is probably in the late 20th century the visualization and materialization of the mind-forged manacles. In Matrix, slavery is a techno-slavery, as it has been defined by Schuchert in one of his articles, and is, I'm quoting from him, bondage of a mankind's own making, a product of our own free will, end of quote. Watching the film The Matrix, the viewer will have to face the possibility that techno-slavery is what might happen to mankind. And it might really happen because a taste of it is being shown to us through the film itself, whose use of technology represents something that had never been seen before. In the late 20th century society, the original sin, the fall of humanity, couldn't but come from technology and couldn't be showed to the audience, paradoxically, but through technology itself. Because of a different context, because of a world which was rapidly changing and whose pre-industrial aspect was starting to affect society in many different aspects, the scenography in Blake's Songs and Prophecies is utterly different. Nevertheless, we can detect the same will to show the audience the consequences of these new forms of institutionalized productive and enslaving processes. Is there a way out to this condition? I think that both Blake and the directors Votorsky want to show, or maybe guide their audience, towards a way out which has very much to do with the perception, or I should say the awareness of what reality is. The same discourse is dear to our authors who express it in different ways throughout their works. The Matrix is very concerned with the nature of reality and perception of reality, and dialogues about these concepts are scattered all around the script. Like when Morpheus asks Neo, what is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you feel, taste, smell, or see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. Neo's training into understanding what the matrix is, his evolution, apart from being the parable of a messianic man who eventually realizes that the world needs him to be saved, is a journey, a literal awakening, as it was for Albion, to a different mode of interpreting and creating reality. He makes this step forward at the end, and he realizes he is an infinite being, and he can bend reality as he pleases. This is when he starts to see the matrix for what it is, that is to say, a computer program, a simulation, a succession of codes and numbers. In Blakean terms, we would say that he's now able to reorganize his innocence. This new vision makes him aware that he can create reality. He can, like a modern poetic genius, create another matrix, and being able for everybody to do so. Blake's wish to retrieve a new mode of seeing in the world that he was living, which of course wasn't haunted by analog and digital issues yet, but which nevertheless had put shades on people's eyes, is definitely impressed in his words too. His poems and works, his drawings, they deal a lot with the images of the eyes and perception. We all very well know his main concern is to get back and recreate the original vision, that faculty which would open a new world to humanity through imagination that he defines as the representation of what eternally exists, really and unchangeably. But in order to do this, a double vision is needed, as he mentioned in one of his poems, and I'm going to quote for him. For a double vision my eyes do see, and a double vision is always with me. With my inward eye is an old man grey, with my outward a thistle across my way. Humanity, like Neo himself came to understand at the end of the film, has an imminent potential to see God within himself, and that is the only way to create the infinite, which is the real world. Neo, which lives apparently in the 20th century, doesn't see any grey man or any thistle. Again, the film takes life into a completely different scenography. But the moment Neo sees the spoon bending on its own, or the moment he penetrates the real nature of the matrix, he definitely learned the lesson that Blake's explaining in his Auguries of Innocence, that is, we are led to believe a lie when we see not through the eye. The external and generative vision, which relies on the senses, is just a projection of the human possibilities, and is what leads to the fall of humanity, which is not a past event, but like Makdisi clearly states, that takes place every day. And he continues, and I'm quoting from Makdisi, the fall does not constitute a reality. Rather, it constitutes a certain highly circumscribed ontology of perception and of being, a mode of perceiving which is precisely what makes reality real to the limited forms of life appropriate to it. As a consequence, reality is a choice. The films too seems to be about this very choice, although it's being displayed through a scenario that would have interested and caught its late 20th century viewers' attention. In Neo's last speech, though, we can definitely see how its language can easily overlap Blake's most known expressions and ideas. For instance, when Neo says, I believe deep down we both want this world to change. I believe that the matrix can remain our cage or it can become our chrysalis. That's what you helped me to understand, that to be free, you cannot change your cage, you have to change yourself. Or when he says, when I used to look out at this world, all I could see was its edges, its boundaries, its rules and controls, its leaders and laws. But now I see another world, a different world, where all things are possible. Where you go from there is a choice I leave to you. To conclude, I would say that although through the representation of different worlds that implicated different discourses and enunciative or visual devices, both authors managed through the reconfiguration of the intertext to create a new mythology. Also, they inscribed their texts into the genre of new prophecy, which legitimizes action, which is a revolutionary act, through art. Blake strongly believed that every honest man is a prophet, and the aim of a prophet, both in the late 18th and 20th century, is to use art as the tool to stimulate the reader and the viewer's imagination, so as for humanity to retrieve the awareness of their own ability to critically think, to get back to the divinity which is within themselves, and the awareness that everybody can be that one whose oneness means being and feeling harmony with the world and all the other beings at the same time. To exploit the prophetic energy is the only way to regenerate the infinite and eternal truth, which we tend to forget every day and from which we tend to fall. Thank you. These are my references.